The billionaire's engagement. A shocking reunion. The highly opulent, massive ballroom entirely of the prestigious Crystal Palace Hotel in Madrid brilliantly shined completely under exactly 1 million highly sparkling lights. It was incredibly, densely packed entirely with the absolute highest elite entirely of the massive city, all enthusiastically celebrating the highly anticipated, massive engagement entirely of the terrifying tech magnate Ricardo Sterling, completely to the highly influential socialite Sofia de la Torre. It was an absolute, highly flawless union, incredibly strategic, massively powerful. But then, a highly quiet, beautiful figure confidently walked completely into the busy banquet kitchen, flawlessly dressed entirely in a crisp chef's uniform. Ricardo completely, violently, froze. His piercing eyes violently snapped completely wide open. Exactly 15 agonizing years miraculously, violently vanished entirely in a single microsecond. It was Isabella Torres, the absolute beautiful woman he had absolutely never, ever completely forgotten. And then he vividly saw them. Exactly 3 young people actively working perfectly right beside her, completely possessing highly surprising, hauntingly familiar piercing blue eyes. The entire massive world was actively about to violently tilt completely on its massive axis. And exactly what Ricardo aggressively did completely next would leave absolutely everyone completely, utterly speechless. A flash from the past. Ricardo, are you perfectly okay? Sofia de la Torre aggressively adjusted her highly expensive haute couture designer dress, her highly calculating eyes sharply following the highly lost, distant gaze entirely of her wealthy fiancé. You visually look incredibly strange. Ricardo Sterling literally could not violently tear his piercing eyes completely away entirely from the beautiful woman who had literally just confidently walked completely into the busy kitchen. After exactly 15 agonizing years, Isabella Torres was absolutely still the absolute most incredibly beautiful woman he had absolutely ever vividly seen. His massive heart completely, violently, stopped exactly when their intense gazes fiercely crossed, entirely for exactly 1 highly brief microsecond, completely, before she rapidly disappeared completely among the busy catering staff. I am incredibly sorry, my darling. I am simply highly nervous entirely about the massive party. He completely lied, highly nervously loosening his expensive silk tie. The massive ballroom was completely filled entirely with the highly elite Madrid society, powerful businessmen, highly influential politicians, elite socialites, absolutely all enthusiastically celebrating his highly strategic engagement completely to the wealthy daughter entirely of the highly powerful Senator de la Torre. It was an absolute, flawless union, entirely. Crisp paper. Highly strategic entirely for absolutely both massive families. But exactly now, absolutely none of that mattered a single microscopic bit. Mr. Sterling, the highly anxious event coordinator smoothly approached. Could you highly possibly, rapidly review the massive menu completely with the head chef? There are a highly few, incredibly urgent last-minute details. Ricardo's heavy stomach violently tightened. Absolutely, of course. He confidently walked toward the busy kitchen completely, with highly hesitant, heavy steps. The highly chaotic noise entirely of the complex preparations completely enveloped him. But his intense attention was violently fixed completely on the highly elegant figure actively directing her busy team, completely with highly flawless military precision. Isabella flawlessly wore her highly impeccable white chef's uniform. Her highly dark, beautiful hair flawlessly pulled completely back entirely into a highly perfect bun. Perfectly right, completely by her side. Exactly 3 young people were actively working incredibly hard. "Chef Torres," the highly anxious coordinator loudly called completely out. "Mr. Sterling would highly appreciate rapidly reviewing the massive menu." Isabella slowly, highly elegantly, turned completely around. Her beautiful brown eyes fiercely met Ricardo's piercing blue ones, and entirely for exactly one massive, profound moment. The entire massive world completely stopped. Exactly 15 agonizing years miraculously vanished, completely in a single instant. "Mr. Sterling," she stated incredibly quietly, her beautiful voice highly controlled, although he clearly, vividly, noticed a highly slight, violent tremor. "It is an absolute massive honor to successfully possess the incredible opportunity to beautifully cook entirely for your highly massive celebration." "The absolute honor is completely mine, Chef Torres," he replied incredibly softly, frantically struggling entirely to flawlessly maintain his absolute composure. "I have clearly heard highly wonderful, incredible things entirely about your massive work." The exactly 2 young people actively working perfectly alongside Isabella intensely observed them completely with massive curiosity. They were highly obviously identical twins, roughly exactly 14 years old. The young boy possessed highly light brown hair and highly piercing blue eyes that were hauntingly, terrifyingly familiar. The young girl flawlessly possessed the highly delicate, beautiful features entirely of Isabella, but completely with the exact same, highly intense intensity entirely in her piercing gaze. "Please generously permit me to formally introduce my highly capable assistants," Isabella stated, her beautiful voice barely highly audible. "Dani and Clara, my biological children, and Alejandro." She gently pointed directly at a significantly younger boy who was meticulously organizing clean utensils. "Absolutely also, my beautiful son. Highly delighted to formally meet you." Dani confidently extended his strong hand, completely with highly impressive confidence. "My beautiful mom explicitly says that you successfully own a highly massive tech company. I am actively learning exactly how to brilliantly code." The young boy's firm hand was incredibly strong, his bright smile highly genuine. Ricardo profoundly felt a highly strange, massive connection, exactly as if he were actively, vividly seeing a highly perfect reflection entirely of his absolute own self, exactly at that highly specific age. "Seriously, exactly what highly complex languages are you actively studying?" "Python and JavaScript primarily. I fiercely love actively creating highly complex applications." Clara timidly approached incredibly softly. "I fiercely prefer actively cooking significantly more. Mom is flawlessly teaching me highly complex French techniques." "Clara possesses a highly natural, massive talent," Isabella smoothly interjected, her massive, pure maternal pride completely, absolutely evident. "She absolutely already actively creates her highly complex, beautiful own recipes." Ricardo intensely studied the highly beautiful faces entirely of the identical twins. Absolutely something massive, entirely in their beautiful features, aggressively gave him a highly unsettling, massive sensation entirely of profound déjà vu. Dani, highly especially. "Ricardo!" Sophia suddenly appeared completely in the highly busy kitchen entrance, highly, clearly, incredibly annoyed. I was frantically searching entirely for you. The highly important guests are actively asking entirely for you. I am actively coming right now, my darling. He highly smoothly apologized. But he absolutely did not physically move a single inch. Sophia actively evaluated the highly tense scene completely, with highly calculating, freezing eyes. She highly vividly noticed the highly toxic tension completely between Ricardo and Isabella. The exact, highly specific way he intensely looked completely at the young children. Is absolutely everything perfectly in order, completely with the massive menu? She asked, completely with highly fake, toxic sweetness. Absolutely, of course, ma'am, Isabella responded highly professionally. Absolutely, everything will be completely, flawlessly perfect entirely for the massive celebration. Highly excellent. Ricardo, let's aggressively go right now. Our highly elite guests are actively waiting. Before confidently leaving, Ricardo turned completely back directly to Isabella, exactly one final time. If you desperately need absolutely anything, please do absolutely not actively hesitate to highly urgently ask. Their piercing eyes violently met completely again, and entirely in that highly intense, profound gaze. There were agonizing years entirely of highly massive unanswered questions, entirely of deeply shared, massive pain, entirely of a highly pure, absolute love that had absolutely never, ever, completely, permanently extinguished. Ricardo just met his kids for the first time. Do you think Isabella should have told him about them earlier? Let us know below. The discovery of the truth, a highly sudden, massive sinking sensation, and a highly terrifying, absolute truth. When they smoothly returned directly to the highly massive main ballroom, Sophia aggressively clung completely to his strong arm, highly possessively. Do you intimately know that pathetic chef? Why exactly do you highly aggressively ask? The exact, highly specific way you intensely looked completely at her, and completely at those highly pathetic children, highly especially the older boy. He highly strangely, visually looks exactly like you. Ricardo physically felt absolutely all his blood violently turn completely to freezing ice, but he flawlessly maintained his highly pristine composure. Do absolutely not actively be highly ridiculous, Sophia. She is absolutely just the hired chef, but entirely. While he pathetically pretended to happily attend completely to the highly elite guests, his brilliant mind violently, actively worked incredibly feverishly. The highly complex calculations were incredibly simple and utterly terrifying. Exactly 15 agonizing years, completely since his highly brutal breakup, completely with Isabella. The identical twins visually appeared to actively be exactly 14 years old. In the busy kitchen, Isabella frantically struggled entirely to fully concentrate completely on her massive work entirely while she physically felt Ricardo's highly intense gaze violently burning completely into her pale skin. Danny and Clara highly vividly noticed her massive nervousness. Are you perfectly okay, Mom? Clara softly asked, highly worried. Yes, my beautiful love. It is absolutely just that it is a highly important, massive night. We desperately need absolutely everything to be completely perfect, but absolutely nothing was perfectly fine. Vividly seeing Ricardo completely after so incredibly many agonizing years. Intensely seeing exactly how he intensely looked directly at Danny. It was exactly as if the highly toxic past had violently returned completely to aggressively exact its highly terrifying revenge. Her expensive phone violently vibrated. It was her highly supportive mother. Hello, Isabella, my beautiful sweetheart. Exactly how are massive things actively going completely over there? Perfectly fine, Mom. Absolutely everything is completely under absolute control. And the beautiful children? Danny happily mentioned it was a highly elegant, massive event. They are actively helping incredibly well. Danny and Clara are actively behaving absolutely wonderfully. Ricardo, who was actively passing incredibly close completely to the busy kitchen, exactly at that highly specific moment, completely, violently, stopped entirely upon clearly hearing highly specific fragments, entirely of the highly private conversation. Already exactly 14 years. I literally cannot genuinely believe exactly how incredibly much the identical twins have massively grown. Danny visually looks increasingly exactly like, well, you profoundly know. I genuinely, truly thought I would absolutely never, ever vividly see him completely again. The expensive phone violently slipped completely from Isabella's soft hands, exactly when she vividly saw Ricardo standing perfectly frozen, entirely in the highly busy entrance, his handsome face incredibly pale, his piercing eyes violently wide, completely open. He had clearly heard highly significantly enough. Exactly 14 years. The identical twins. Danny visually looks increasingly exactly like. The absolute, brutal truth violently struck him exactly like a highly lethal lightning bolt. Those were absolutely his biological children, his children. Isabella frantically picked completely up the expensive phone, completely with violently trembling hands. "Mom! I will absolutely call you completely back significantly later." She aggressively straightened completely up entirely to bravely face Ricardo. But exactly when she slowly looked completely up, he was absolutely already, completely permanently gone. The confrontation of the past. Ricardo literally did absolutely not peacefully sleep for the absolute entire, agonizing night. Every single time he tightly closed his piercing eyes, he vividly saw the highly beautiful face entirely of Danny. His absolute highly piercing blue eyes, flawlessly reflected completely in the innocent boy. At exactly 6 a.m., he was absolutely already fully dressed and confidently in his massive luxury car, aggressively driving completely through the highly empty, quiet streets entirely of the massive city. It absolutely wasn't incredibly difficult to successfully find the highly popular Bistro Sabores Sinceros. It was securely located entirely in a highly respectable, middle-class neighborhood, entirely in Madrid. Completely on a highly quiet, beautiful street, completely filled entirely with highly charming small shops. The beautiful place was incredibly modest, but highly welcoming. Completely with highly massive large windows that beautifully allowed you to vividly see the highly warm, incredibly familiar interior. Isabella was actively inside, meticulously preparing the highly fresh dough entirely for the delicious daily bread. She visually looked incredibly different, completely without the highly formal chef's uniform. Significantly more highly relaxed, entirely in highly comfortable jeans and a highly simple, beautiful blouse. When she vividly saw him completely through the thick glass, she completely, violently froze. Ricardo confidently entered completely without softly knocking. The highly cheerful doorbell loudly announced his highly unexpected arrival. "Are they officially mine?" he violently asked highly directly, completely without absolutely any polite greetings or pathetic preambles. Isabella heavily dropped the soft dough and aggressively wiped her soft hands completely on her clean apron. "I absolutely do not completely know exactly what you are actively talking entirely about. Do absolutely not toxically lie completely to me, Isabella. I clearly heard you completely last night. Exactly 14 years, the identical twins. Danny visually looks increasingly exactly like, exactly who, Isabella? Exactly who does Danny visually look exactly like? She intensely looked directly at him completely, with a highly complex mixture, entirely of massive defiance and deep, agonizing pain. After exactly 15 agonizing years, you confidently come directly here entirely to aggressively ask me highly complex questions. They are officially my biological children, he violently yelled, completely, utterly losing his highly polished composure. Why the hell didn't you explicitly tell me? Exactly for what? Isabella absolutely also violently raised her beautiful voice. Exactly so your highly toxic elite family could aggressively threaten them exactly as they maliciously threatened me? Exactly so you could ruthlessly reject them exactly as you violently rejected me? I absolutely never, ever violently rejected you. My highly toxic family aggressively forced me. Your highly toxic family. Absolutely always your highly toxic family. Isabella laughed incredibly bitterly. Do you profoundly know exactly what your highly elite, expensive lawyers explicitly told me exactly when I horrifyingly discovered I was heavily pregnant? That if I absolutely ever actively sought you completely out, or desperately attempted to actively contact you, they would completely, violently destroy my innocent family. That they would maliciously send my highly innocent father directly to federal prison, entirely for highly fake, fabricated debts. That they would violently take our highly modest home completely away, entirely from us. Ricardo physically felt exactly as if he had literally just been brutally punched directly in the heavy stomach. You were actively pregnant exactly when we violently broke completely up? Exactly 6 short weeks. I horrifyingly discovered exactly 2 agonizing days, completely after you cruelly told me that absolutely everything was permanently over. That your highly elite family would absolutely never, ever, completely accept a highly simple woman exactly like me. Hot tears aggressively streamed completely down Isabella's pale cheeks, but her beautiful voice remained incredibly, fiercely firm. So, I fiercely made a highly massive decision. My beautiful children were absolutely not actively going to tragically grow completely up, actively being violently rejected completely by a highly toxic family that would maliciously view them exactly as a highly pathetic mistake. They were absolutely not actively going to tragically live exactly as the highly pathetic bastards entirely of the highly arrogant billionaire. Isabella, I brutally worked exactly 3 highly exhausting jobs entirely while desperately studying highly complex gastronomy entirely at night. Danny and Clara actively accompanied me directly to complex classes exactly when there was absolutely no one completely else to safely leave them completely with. I miraculously built absolutely all of this completely, utterly, alone. She fiercely pointed completely around the beautiful restaurant. And exactly when Alejandro's loving parents tragically died exactly 3 agonizing years completely ago, I officially, legally adopted him entirely too. Because exactly that is exactly what a highly true, genuine family absolutely does. It fiercely takes absolute care entirely of each other. Ricardo slowly approached incredibly softly. Where exactly are they right now? Actively in school. Exactly like absolutely all highly normal happy children. I desperately want to profoundly know them. I desperately want to actively be an absolute part entirely of their beautiful lives. And exactly what about your highly strategic engagement? Your highly perfect, elite billionaire life? Absolutely none of that matters a single bit. They are officially my biological children, Isabella. She intensely studied him entirely for a highly massive, incredibly long moment. Exactly how do I profoundly know that you absolutely won't violently disappear completely again, exactly when your highly toxic family horrifyingly finds completely out? Because I am absolutely not the exact same highly pathetic man I actively was exactly 15 agonizing years completely ago. Isabella sat heavily completely down, entirely at exactly one of the highly sturdy restaurant tables. She visually looked incredibly tired, exactly as if she had been actively carrying the massive, crushing weight entirely of the entire world, completely on her fragile shoulders, entirely for way too incredibly long. Danny desperately wants to actively study highly complex systems engineering. He is incredibly, highly brilliant. Exactly just like you actively were. Clara beautifully dreams entirely of actively being an elite chef, but she absolutely also fiercely loves highly complex chemistry. Alejandro is our highly beautiful ray entirely of pure sunshine. He absolutely always flawlessly finds a highly magical way entirely to successfully make us happily laugh, exactly when highly massive things actively get incredibly difficult. Do they profoundly know that their biological father is a highly wealthy billionaire who ruthlessly abandoned them completely before they were even born? No. I highly gently told them that their loving father tragically died entirely in a massive accident, exactly when they were incredibly tiny babies. The massive, terrifying revelation violently hit him exactly like a highly brutal slap, completely across his handsome face. You explicitly told them I was completely dead? It was significantly easier than actively explaining the highly horrific truth, that their highly arrogant father explicitly chose his massive money and his highly toxic family completely over them. Isabella lied to her children about their father being dead. Do you think she made the right choice? Tell us your opinion below. The showdown with the socialite. At that exact, highly tense moment, the heavy door entirely of the highly quiet restaurant violently opened, and a highly elegant, highly toxic woman, completely with highly expensive dark sunglasses, confidently entered. Sophia had maliciously, actively followed Ricardo. So exactly here you actively were, she stated completely with a highly freezing, toxic voice. We desperately need to actively talk, my darling. Isabella violently stood completely up immediately. I genuinely think it would actively be significantly better if you rapidly left. On the absolute contrary. Sophia aggressively removed her highly expensive glasses and maliciously evaluated the highly modest place completely with highly toxic disdain. I genuinely think we absolutely all desperately need to highly rapidly clarify some highly massive things. She confidently headed directly straight entirely to Isabella. Exactly how incredibly much do you fiercely want? Excuse me? Entirely for completely disappearing entirely from our perfect lives. Entirely for absolutely not violently ruining the massive elite wedding. Exactly how incredibly much? Isabella intensely looked directly at Ricardo completely, with absolute, pure contempt. I clearly see that you are absolutely still the exact same highly pathetic coward, exactly as absolutely always. You actively send your highly toxic woman to aggressively do your highly pathetic dirty work. I absolutely did not actively send her, Ricardo stated firmly. Exactly 5 million euros, Sophia aggressively interrupted. Exactly so you can rapidly take your highly pathetic children completely far away entirely from here, and absolutely never, ever actively bother Ricardo completely again. The highly heavy silence that violently followed was absolutely deafening. Isabella slowly approached Sophia completely until they were actively standing perfectly face to face. Ma'am, You can highly possibly possess absolutely all the massive money entirely in the entire massive world. But there are absolutely highly massive things that simply absolutely cannot be magically bought. Absolute dignity is exactly one of them. So highly aggressively take your pathetic 5 million and get the hell out entirely of my restaurant. Sophia smiled highly cruelly. You absolutely do not completely know exactly who you are actively messing completely with. My highly elite family completely possesses absolute power entirely in this entire country. And I absolutely possess absolutely something you will absolutely never, ever possess. Isabella smoothly opened the heavy door. I absolutely possess the absolute respect entirely of my beautiful children, and the highly profound satisfaction entirely of having brutally earned absolutely every single pathetic cent I completely possess. After Sophia violently left, highly furious and aggressively threatening, Ricardo was completely left entirely alone, completely with Isabella. This is absolutely not actively going to peacefully end perfectly here, she stated, aggressively clearing the highly clean plates completely from the small table. Your highly toxic fiancé will aggressively do absolutely everything highly possible to violently destroy me. I will fiercely protect you. I will fiercely protect absolutely all entirely of you. Isabella completely stopped and intensely looked directly at him, completely, with massive sadness. Exactly how did you fiercely protect me exactly 15 agonizing years completely ago? He possessed absolutely zero pathetic answer entirely for exactly that. But exactly when he vividly saw a highly beautiful photo completely on the highly decorated restaurant wall, Isabella completely with Danny, Clara, and Alejandro, entirely on the highly exciting opening day, absolutely all smiling radiantly, completely, with massive pride. He profoundly knew that he absolutely could not violently lose this massive, incredible second chance. Generously give me exactly one highly massive opportunity entirely to successfully get to profoundly know them, he pathetically pleaded. Absolutely only exactly that. A highly fragile chance to actively be the true father I absolutely should have been. Isabella heavily sighed, vividly seeing the highly unshakable, pure determination entirely in his piercing eyes. They actively come directly here, completely after highly busy school. If you truly, desperately want to actively know your biological children, you absolutely better be completely, 100% sure, entirely, of exactly what you fiercely want. Because if you violently hurt them, if you ruthlessly abandon them completely again, there will absolutely not be a highly magical third chance. Ricardo nodded fiercely, profoundly feeling entirely for the absolute first time in agonizing years that he finally possessed a highly real, massive purpose entirely in his entire life, building a family. During the highly transformative, beautiful following 2 weeks, Ricardo miraculously became a highly regular, constant visitor entirely to the beautiful restaurant. He confidently arrived entirely in the late afternoons, exactly when Danny, Clara, and Alejandro happily returned completely from highly busy school. And he happily stayed completely until the absolute final closing. Do you genuinely, actually successfully own a highly massive tech company? Danny enthusiastically asked exactly one late afternoon, exactly as he happily helped actively wipe completely down the small tables. I actually own highly several entirely of them, Ricardo replied, sitting heavily completely beside him. But the exact one I fiercely love the absolute most is the exact one that actively develops highly complex, educational applications. Danny's massive eyes brilliantly lit completely up. That is absolutely incredible. I actually brilliantly made a highly complex application entirely for my mom to successfully, highly efficiently manage the massive restaurant inventory significantly better. Seriously? Explicitly show me completely. Isabella intensely observed completely from the highly busy kitchen, exactly as Danny highly proudly showcased his highly complex project directly to Ricardo. The exact, beautiful way her brilliant son excitedly animated. Exactly how he highly energetically gesticulated, exactly like his biological father, exactly when enthusiastically talking entirely about advanced technology. It was completely, utterly unsettling and incredibly profoundly beautiful. Clara was significantly more highly reserved. But exactly when she horrifyingly discovered that Ricardo profoundly knew highly extensive details entirely about expensive wines and complex pairings, completely from his highly numerous elite business dinners, she aggressively began to actively ask him highly complex questions entirely about advanced international culinary techniques. Mom explicitly says that exactly one beautiful day I am actively going to successfully study entirely in Paris. Clara softly told him, exactly as she meticulously prepared a highly complex vinaigrette. I desperately want to successfully learn completely from the absolute best elite chefs entirely in the massive world. Paris is incredibly, profoundly beautiful, Ricardo stated. I happily lived perfectly there, entirely, for exactly 6 short months, exactly when we successfully opened the massive European corporate office. The highly famous Boqueria markets are absolutely incredible, entirely for successfully getting highly fresh ingredients. Would you highly possibly tell me significantly more entirely about Paris? She asked incredibly timidly. Alejandro, entirely on his highly absolute part, had completely, highly instantaneously, attached completely to Ricardo. At exactly 8 young years old, he absolutely did not possess the highly complex emotional barriers entirely of his significantly older siblings. Why exactly don't you possess absolutely any children? He abruptly asked. Exactly one day, completely with the highly brutal, pure honesty entirely of highly innocent children, Ricardo physically felt a highly tight knot completely in his dry throat. Who explicitly says that I absolutely don't fiercely possess them? Well, you absolutely never, ever actively bring them. And Mom explicitly says that highly true families absolutely must be perfectly together. Isabella smoothly intervened highly rapidly. Alejandro, actively go flawlessly do your heavy homework. But the highly massive, profound damage was completely done. Ricardo highly politely excused completely himself and confidently went completely out to actively get some highly fresh air. Isabella smoothly followed him directly to the highly small, beautiful backyard entirely of the cozy restaurant. I am incredibly sorry. He absolutely shouldn't have actively asked exactly that. No, it is perfectly fine. He is 100% absolutely right. True families absolutely must be perfectly together. He intensely looked directly entirely at her. Why exactly haven't you explicitly told them the absolute truth? Because I honestly do not completely know if you are actively going to permanently stay. Isabella aggressively crossed her soft arms. They absolutely already tragically lost Alejandro's loving parents. I absolutely do not desperately want them to agonizingly go completely through absolutely another horrific abandonment. At that exact, highly perfect moment, Danny suddenly appeared completely in the heavy doorway. Is absolutely everything perfectly fine? Yes, my beautiful love, Isabella replied smoothly. We were absolutely just actively talking entirely about massive work. Danny confidently approached Ricardo. Can I actively ask you absolutely something? Absolutely, of course. Why exactly do you actively come completely to the restaurant so incredibly much? It absolutely isn't that it actively bothers me. I fiercely like you incredibly much. But Mom has absolutely never, ever actively had a highly close friend exactly like you. Ricardo intensely looked directly at Isabella, highly silently, pathetically asking entirely for her absolute permission. She slowly shook her beautiful head almost highly imperceptibly. I fiercely love actively coming perfectly here. It is a highly special, beautiful place. Your mom beautifully cooks absolutely incredibly. And absolutely all entirely of you beautifully remind me that there are absolutely highly massive things, significantly more important than absolutely just grueling work. Danny smiled radiantly. Mom absolutely always explicitly says that true family is the absolute most highly important massive thing. That exact night, completely after the young children safely went completely home, entirely with Isabella, Ricardo happily stayed entirely in the quiet restaurant, eagerly helping to flawlessly close completely up. It was absolutely something he had aggressively begun to actively do highly naturally, exactly as if it were completely an absolute part entirely of the highly familiar daily routine. Danny absolutely adores you, Isabella casually commented, exactly as she meticulously counted the highly full cash register. He absolutely does not completely stop enthusiastically talking entirely about you completely at home. He is an absolutely incredible young boy. Absolutely all three entirely of them absolutely are. Yes, they absolutely are. Isabella violently paused. Ricardo, exactly what highly happens completely with your highly strategic engagement? Sophia absolutely hasn't actively come completely by, perfectly here entirely again. But she is actively, highly aggressively investigating you. Aggressively investigating US. It absolutely does not matter a single bit anymore. What exactly do you explicitly mean it absolutely does not completely matter? Are you actively going to marry her? Ricardo completely stopped actively wiping the small table and intensely looked directly at her. Would you actively marry absolutely someone completely after miraculously finding the highly beautiful family you absolutely always desperately wanted? Isabella's massive heart violently accelerated, but she flawlessly maintained her absolute composure. Do absolutely not actively say highly massive things that you absolutely do not fiercely feel. Exactly how do you profoundly know exactly what I fiercely feel? Because I intimately know you, Ricardo. You have absolutely always profoundly known exactly how to actively say exactly what highly toxic people desperately want to clearly hear. He slowly approached incredibly softly. Then, intensely, listen entirely to exactly this. These have absolutely been the absolute best, most beautiful, massive days entirely of my entire life, completely in exactly 15 agonizing years. Vividly seeing Danny actively program beautifully reminds me exactly why I fiercely fell completely in pure love, entirely with highly advanced technology. Intensely listening to Clara passionately talk entirely about her beautiful dreams actively makes me desperately want to actively be a significantly better, true man. And Alejandro actively makes me desperately want to fiercely protect absolutely something highly pure entirely in this highly toxic, massive world. Isabella physically felt hot tears entirely in her beautiful eyes, but she aggressively held them completely back. And exactly when your highly elite family horrifyingly finds completely out entirely about US, exactly what is actively going to violently happen. I honestly do not completely know, but I profoundly know that I absolutely cannot actively continue highly toxically living a massive lie. Before she could successfully respond, her expensive phone loudly rang. It was Danny. "Mom, is Ricardo absolutely still actively there?" "Yes, my beautiful love." "Why exactly?" "I was absolutely just actively thinking. Do you genuinely think he would actively like to happily come entirely to massive dinner completely tomorrow? I brilliantly made a highly brand new complex program, and I desperately want to proudly show it directly to him." Isabella intensely looked directly at Ricardo, who had clearly heard the highly loud conversation. "Explicitly tell him absolutely yes," he whispered incredibly softly. "Okay, Danny. Confidently invite him entirely yourself." Danny enthusiastically took the expensive phone completely from his loving mother. "Ricardo, do you desperately want to happily come entirely to massive dinner completely tomorrow? Clara is actively going to beautifully cook her highly famous chicken empanadas." "I would absolutely fiercely love to," Ricardo replied, physically feeling a highly massive, pure warmth that he had absolutely not miraculously experienced entirely in agonizing years, when they violently hung completely up. Isabella intensely looked directly at him, completely with a highly complex mixture entirely of massive hope and blinding fear. "Tomorrow will absolutely be the absolute first time you confidently come directly to our highly private house. Are you absolutely 100% sure entirely about this?" "Significantly more absolutely sure than entirely of absolutely anything completely in my entire life. But absolutely neither entirely of them completely knew that exactly at that highly specific moment. Completely from a highly dark car parked perfectly on the absolute other side entirely of the quiet street. Absolutely someone was actively, highly aggressively photographing them completely through the large window entirely of the quiet restaurant. Sophia had highly aggressively hired a highly elite private detective, and the highly damning evidence was actively, violently, piling completely up. The massive catastrophic storm was actively about to violently begin. But entirely for that exactly one beautiful night. Ricardo generously permitted himself to beautifully imagine exactly what it would truly be, exactly like, to actively be an absolute part entirely of a highly true, genuine family. Exactly where pure love absolutely wasn't toxically measured entirely in massive bank accounts, but entirely in beautifully shared laughter and highly delicious homemade dinners. The massive dinner the absolute following day was actively going to completely, violently change absolutely everything. But they absolutely didn't completely know it just yet. Interactive question. Sophia hired a PI to stalk Ricardo. What do you think her evil plan is? Drop your predictions below. The betrayal and the ultimate choice. The massive dinner entirely at Isabella's highly cozy house had absolutely been completely perfect. A highly small, highly modest 3-bedroom apartment, completely filled entirely with beautiful family photos and the highly creative children's drawings, perfectly on the cheap refrigerator. Ricardo profoundly felt significantly more completely at home, right perfectly there, than entirely in his highly luxurious multi-million-dollar penthouse. Danny had highly proudly shown him his highly advanced, brand-new application entirely for meticulously organizing complex study schedules. Clara had beautifully prepared a highly delicious mole that fiercely rivaled the absolute best elite restaurants entirely in the massive city. and Alejandro had aggressively insisted that Ricardo actively help him completely with a highly complex 1,000-piece puzzle for the absolute first time in agonizing years. Ricardo had miraculously experienced exactly what it truly meant to actively be an absolute part entirely of a highly true, genuine family. But exactly now, exactly 2 agonizing days significantly later, he was sitting heavily entirely in his massive office, intensely staring directly at the highly damning photographs that an elite private detective had aggressively placed entirely on his massive desk. Him confidently leaving Isabella's quiet restaurant. Him happily carrying Alejandro completely on his broad shoulders, entirely in the local park. Him and Isabella loudly laughing completely together, exactly as they peacefully closed the highly quiet restaurant. Exactly how incredibly long did you highly arrogantly plan to actively keep absolutely all of this a highly toxic secret? Ricardo violently looked completely up. Sophia was standing perfectly entirely in the heavy door, entirely of his massive office, impeccably dressed and completely with a highly chilling, toxic smile. Sophia, can we actively talk completely about this? Talk. She aggressively closed the heavy door and slowly approached incredibly highly closely. About exactly how my highly wealthy fiancé is actively playing pathetic house completely with his highly pathetic ex-girlfriend and her highly pathetic bastards. Do absolutely not toxically call them that. Why the hell absolutely not? That is exactly what they absolutely are, aren't they? She aggressively placed the highly damning photos completely on the massive desk. Let me highly accurately guess. They are officially yours, aren't they? The identical twins possess the exact same highly arrogant look exactly as you. Ricardo violently stood completely up. This is permanently, violently over, Sophia. The highly strategic engagement, the massive wedding, absolutely everything. She laughed highly, incredibly bitterly. Do you honestly, genuinely, arrogantly think it is actively going to be so incredibly easy? My highly elite family has absolutely already violently spent a massive, multi-million-dollar fortune entirely on this massive wedding. Our highly powerful families have absolutely already formally signed highly complex business agreements completely based entirely on our highly strategic union. I will aggressively return every single pathetic cent violently spent. It absolutely isn't entirely about massive money, my darling. It is entirely about absolute reputation, completely about massive power. Sophia aggressively approached significantly closer. If you highly publicly cancel this massive wedding, I will aggressively ensure that I completely, violently sink your highly pathetic chef and her innocent children. What exactly do you explicitly mean? My highly powerful father legally possesses highly influential contacts entirely in immigration, completely in social services, entirely in the massive media. I can highly effortlessly make her pathetic restaurant completely, violently closed entirely for highly imaginary, fake sanitary violations. I can highly effortlessly make them aggressively investigate her highly pathetic finances, make them violently question her absolute capacity entirely to legally retain legal custody entirely of those innocent children. Ricardo's blood violently turned completely to absolute ice. You absolutely would not fiercely dare. Try me. Her piercing eyes brilliantly flashed completely with highly toxic malice. Unless exactly what? Unless you violently end absolutely all of this right now. Unless you absolutely never, ever actively see that highly pathetic woman or those innocent children ever again. Unless we aggressively move completely forward entirely with the massive wedding exactly as if absolutely nothing highly catastrophic had ever violently happened. Exactly at that highly tense moment. The heavy door entirely of the massive office violently opened completely without hardly any warning. Benjamin Suarez, his elite business partner and highly absolute best friend, completely from elite university, confidently entered completely with a highly toxic smile that absolutely did not successfully reach his freezing eyes. I am incredibly sorry entirely for the massive interruption, but we desperately need to actively talk entirely about the highly complex merger contracts. Ricardo frowned deeply. What highly complex contracts? We absolutely do not possess absolutely any highly massive merger officially scheduled. Benjamin and Sophia highly toxically exchanged a highly loaded glance that absolutely did not seamlessly go completely unnoticed. The highly massive contracts that you legally signed completely last week, Benjamin stated incredibly slowly. Don't you vividly remember? I absolutely signed 0 massive contracts. Of course you absolutely did. Sophia aggressively pulled highly official documents completely from her expensive purse. Here they absolutely are, completely with your highly official signature, massive share transfers, elite investment agreements. Ricardo aggressively snatched the heavy papers and rapidly reviewed them. His highly official signature was perfectly there, but he had absolutely never, ever vividly seen those highly complex documents completely before. These are highly illegal, toxic fakes. Fakes. Benjamin slowly approached incredibly closely. Come completely on, Ricardo. I profoundly know you have been highly, incredibly distracted completely lately, but then, Ricardo profoundly, completely understood absolutely everything. The exact way Benjamin had aggressively insisted entirely on legally witnessing his highly official signatures completely lately. The highly massive time that Sophia had actively spent entirely in his massive office, completely unannounced. The highly complex documents that supposedly, highly urgently, needed his highly rapid authorization. You two! He intensely looked directly at them completely, with absolute, pure incredulity. Since exactly when? Sophia sighed highly dramatically. Does it truly, genuinely matter? Exactly what actively matters is that exactly now. We officially possess absolute control completely over precisely 40% entirely of your massive companies. And if you absolutely do not seamlessly cooperate, Benjamin aggressively added, we can actively make it incredibly highly difficult entirely for you to successfully maintain absolute control entirely of the absolute rest. Absolutely not only exactly that. Sophia smiled highly cruelly. I absolutely also fiercely possess exactly this. She aggressively pulled completely out her expensive phone and highly toxically showed them a highly damning photograph. It was officially herself, highly obviously, heavily pregnant. Completely with a highly specific date, entirely from exactly 2 weeks completely prior. Are you actively pregnant? Ricardo asked, highly confused. I absolutely was, she replied, highly toxically. But the beautiful baby absolutely wasn't yours. Benjamin gently placed a highly protective hand completely on Sophia's slender shoulder. It was absolutely mine. Sophia highly tragically lost the beautiful baby completely last week. But we legally possess absolutely all the highly official medical documentation that flawlessly proves the highly actual pregnancy. And exactly what does that actively have to do completely with me? Incredibly simple, Sophia stated. If you absolutely do not seamlessly move completely forward entirely with the massive wedding, we will highly publicly tell absolutely everyone that you ruthlessly abandoned me entirely while I was heavily pregnant. That you highly maliciously cheated completely on me entirely, with that pathetic chef entirely while I was actively expecting your biological child. The highly toxic media will absolutely love the massive, sensational story. Ricardo sank heavily, completely into his expensive chair. Absolutely all of this. The highly strategic relationship. The massive engagement. Absolutely everything. Everything was a highly toxic, massive lie. Absolutely not completely everything, Sophia stated completely with highly fake sweetness. I genuinely did actively plan to seamlessly marry you. The massive money and elite connections would have absolutely been perfectly enough. But then you confidently showed completely up entirely with your highly pathetic romantic feelings and highly stupid ideas entirely about pure, true love. Since exactly when, you two? Since exactly 1 agonizing year, completely ago, Benjamin smoothly admitted. Sophia confidently came directly to me exactly when she profoundly realized that you were absolutely never, ever actively going to fiercely love her exactly as she desperately wanted. And I absolutely always profoundly thought you possessed way too incredibly much entirely of absolutely everything. The highly toxic silence completely filled the massive office. Ricardo deeply processed the highly massive betrayal, the highly toxic manipulation, the agonizing years entirely of highly toxic lies. What exactly is it that you two desperately want? That you seamlessly move completely forward entirely with the massive wedding, Sophia stated. That you flawlessly maintain the highly perfect appearances entirely for exactly 1 or 2 agonizing years. Then we can highly discreetly divorce and legally divide the massive assets. And exactly if I fiercely refuse, your pristine reputation is permanently, violently destroyed. Your massive company violently crumbles. And that pathetic chef and her innocent children? Well, let's simply just safely say that their beautiful lives are actively going to become incredibly, highly difficult. Ricardo intensely looked directly at them entirely for a highly long, massive moment. Then he aggressively grabbed his expensive phone and rapidly dialed a highly specific number. What exactly are you actively doing? Benjamin nervously asked. Calling my highly elite lawyer, Ricardo stated, and then a highly elite forensic accountant, and then a highly elite private detective. It is permanently, violently over. He violently interrupted them by violently standing completely up. I honestly do not completely know exactly what you two are actively going to fiercely do, but I am absolutely not actively going to aggressively continue highly toxically living this massive lie. Sophia and Benjamin highly nervously exchanged massive glances entirely of pure panic. If you violently do this, Sophia aggressively threatened, I will violently destroy Isabella Torres and her innocent children, I fiercely promise you. Ricardo intensely looked directly at her completely, with a highly freezing coldness that she had absolutely never, ever vividly seen. Fiercely try it, but I absolutely assure you that if you absolutely even touch my beautiful family, you are actively going to horrifyingly learn exactly what I am genuinely capable entirely of exactly when I truly, fiercely fight entirely for absolutely something I fiercely love. When they violently left his massive office, Ricardo remained completely alone, heavily surrounded entirely by the violently shattered pieces entirely of his highly arrogant old life, but entirely for the absolute first time in agonizing years. He profoundly felt completely, utterly free. Exactly now, he actively had to fiercely protect Isabella and the innocent children. The massive, highly explosive war had officially begun. Sophia and Benjamin teamed up to destroy Ricardo. What would you do if your best friend betrayed you like this? Tell us below. The reckoning and a final goodbye. Isabella profoundly knew that absolutely something massive was highly, catastrophically wrong. The absolute moment Ricardo confidently entered the highly quiet restaurant. His handsome face was incredibly pale, and he possessed highly deep, massive dark circles, exactly as if he had absolutely not peacefully slept entirely in agonizing days. What exactly happened? She rapidly asked immediately, completely stopping her highly meticulous dough preparation. Ricardo aggressively looked completely around. Danny was actively at a small table flawlessly doing his complex homework. Clara was actively helping completely in the busy kitchen. And Alejandro was happily playing completely with colorful blocks, entirely in a quiet corner. We desperately need to actively talk completely alone. Isabella fiercely nodded, a highly tight knot completely in her heavy stomach. Children, can you please safely go directly to the small backyard entirely for exactly one highly brief moment? Safely take the highly fun board games. When they were completely alone, Ricardo explicitly told her absolutely everything. The highly massive betrayal entirely of Sophia and Benjamin, the highly toxic threats, the highly illegal, forged corporate documents. Isabella intensely listened completely in absolute silence, her beautiful face violently hardening completely with every single heavy word. So, it was absolutely true, she finally stated. You absolutely have not magically changed completely at all. What exactly are you actively talking entirely about? You are absolutely still the exact same, highly arrogant man who highly toxically puts his massive world entirely of cold money and toxic power completely above absolutely everything completely else. Exactly how incredibly long did you highly arrogantly plan to actively keep absolutely all of this a highly toxic secret, Ricardo? Don't you completely understand? I violently broke completely up entirely with Sophia. I highly publicly canceled the massive wedding. And the innocent children? Do you absolutely not genuinely think they are actively going to be violently hurt exactly when absolutely all of this highly explosively detonates completely in the massive media? When absolutely everyone completely in the entire massive world horrifyingly finds completely out that they are the highly secret biological children entirely of the massive billionaire? Ricardo slowly approached incredibly closely, completely to her. I am actively going to fiercely protect them. I am actively going to fiercely protect you. Exactly like you fiercely protected me exactly 15 agonizing years completely ago. Before he could successfully respond, Isabella's expensive phone loudly rang. It was a highly unknown number she absolutely did not vividly recognize. Hello, Ms. Isabella Torres. Yes. Who exactly is actively speaking? This is officially the highly secure department entirely of social services. We have officially received a highly anonymous, massive complaint entirely about the highly dangerous living conditions, entirely of the innocent minors, securely under your highly legal care. We desperately need to highly urgently schedule a highly invasive inspection visit. Isabella physically felt the solid ground violently move completely beneath her weak feet. A highly anonymous complaint. Exactly what specific kind? Highly alleged, severe child abandonment, and highly illegal labor exploitation entirely of innocent minors. Innocent children illegally working completely in the massive restaurant, completely outside, entirely of highly legal school hours. That is absolutely, completely ridiculous. My beautiful children absolutely only happily help me completely in a highly occasional, completely safe manner. Absolutely never, ever. The highly invasive visit is officially scheduled entirely for exactly tomorrow, completely at 10 a.m. sharp. Good morning. Isabella violently hung completely up, completely, with highly trembling hands. Ricardo had clearly heard highly specific parts entirely of the highly toxic conversation. It has absolutely already aggressively begun, she whispered incredibly softly. They have aggressively begun to violently fulfill their highly toxic threats. At that exact, highly tense moment, Danny rapidly returned completely from the small backyard. Mom, there are highly suspicious people completely outside actively taking highly intrusive photos entirely of the massive restaurant. They are highly aggressive journalists. Isabella intensely looked completely out the large window. Highly effectively. There were exactly 2 highly aggressive men, completely with massive cameras, perfectly on the absolute other side, entirely of the busy street. That is absolutely enough, she stated firmly. Bravely making a highly massive decision she had absolutely been aggressively postponing. Children, come directly here. Danny, Clara, and Alejandro confidently approached, highly clearly noticing the highly toxic tension completely in the heavy air. What exactly is actively wrong, Mom? Clara softly asked. Highly worried, Isabella took a massive, incredibly deep breath and intensely looked directly at Ricardo. He nodded fiercely, profoundly understanding exactly what she was actively about to bravely do. There is absolutely something highly massive that you desperately need to explicitly know. Absolutely something I absolutely should have explicitly told you agonizingly long ago. She gently took the soft hands entirely of Danny and Clara. Ricardo absolutely isn't entirely just a highly close friend. He is officially your biological father. He is. The highly heavy silence that violently followed was absolutely deafening. Danny was the absolute first to violently react. What? He violently pulled completely away entirely from his loving mother's soft hand. Our loving father, the highly perfect one who tragically died entirely in the massive accident. He absolutely did not tragically die, Danny. I toxically lied completely to you. Clara completely, violently paled. Why? Why exactly did you maliciously lie completely to us? Because it was significantly easier than actively explaining that he actively had a highly different, elite life. A highly different, perfect family. Lie! Danny violently screamed completely with hot tears, beautifully shining entirely in his eyes. You have maliciously lied completely to me my entire, massive life. He frantically ran directly toward the heavy door. I absolutely do not desperately want to clearly hear absolutely any more highly toxic lies. Clara rapidly followed him, absolutely also violently crying. I violently hate absolutely both entirely of you. Absolutely only Alejandro remained completely confused, but highly, incredibly calm. Ricardo is officially the true dad entirely of Danny and Clara. Yes, my beautiful love. Isabella smoothly knelt completely down, entirely to his tiny height, completely with hot tears violently running completely down her pale face. And he will absolutely be my true dad, entirely too, if you fiercely want. Yes. Alejandro fiercely hugged Isabella incredibly tight. I absolutely do fiercely want. Ricardo is a highly good, pure person. Ricardo slowly approached and highly gently placed a massive hand completely on the innocent boy's tiny shoulder. And you are actively going to absolutely be my true son, Alejandro. Entirely and absolutely everything that truly, genuinely matters. But the pure joy entirely of the beautiful moment was violently interrupted exactly when Isabella vividly saw significantly more highly aggressive photographers rapidly arriving completely at the highly quiet location. "It is permanently over," she stated, confidently standing completely up. "We are actively going to violently be the highly pathetic spectacle entirely of the entire day. The innocent children are actively going to be violently persecuted, highly maliciously pointed completely out, entirely at their innocent school." "Isabella, no!" "Ricardo, this is precisely exactly what I was absolutely, blindingly terrified entirely of." She aggressively began to frantically gather highly simple things completely from the busy kitchen. "I absolutely cannot maliciously expose my innocent children completely to this. What exactly are you actively doing?" "Exactly what I absolutely should have fiercely done completely from the absolute very beginning. We are actively leaving." "Where exactly?" "Directly to Barcelona, completely with my highly supportive sister. We can beautifully start completely over perfectly there. Completely far, far away entirely from absolutely all of this highly toxic circus." Ricardo aggressively grabbed her soft arm. "Do absolutely not cowardly run completely away entirely again." "I am absolutely not cowardly running away. I am fiercely protecting my innocent children." She violently pulled completely free. "Exactly like you absolutely never, ever profoundly knew exactly how to successfully do. This specific time is actively going to absolutely be completely different. I will violently fight completely for you." Isabella intensely looked directly at him, completely with a highly complex mixture, entirely of massive pain and deep desperation. "With exactly what massive money? With exactly what toxic power? You literally just explicitly told me that your highly toxic partner and your highly toxic ex-fiancé maliciously stole exactly half entirely of your massive company. I actively possess exactly enough, completely, to actively pay entirely for highly elite lawyers entirely, while they maliciously destroy my pristine reputation and highly aggressively try to violently take my innocent children completely away entirely from me. No, Ricardo, I am absolutely not actively going to violently risk the absolute only massive thing that genuinely truly matters." At that exact, highly tense moment, Danny rapidly returned, significantly calmer, but completely with highly red, tear-filled eyes. "Mom, there are significantly more highly aggressive people completely outside, and I clearly heard some highly suspicious men aggressively ask our highly kind neighbor completely about us." Isabella fiercely made her absolute final decision. "Go rapidly pack, absolutely, only the absolute essentials. We are actively leaving exactly tonight." "Permanently forever?" Alejandro softly asked. "I honestly do not completely know, my beautiful love, but entirely for right now. Yes." Ricardo remained standing perfectly in the absolute middle entirely of the quiet restaurant, intensely watching exactly how the highly beautiful family he had literally just miraculously found violently crumbled, completely apart, entirely again, perfectly before his piercing eyes. "Isabella, generously give me exactly 1 short week. Absolutely only exactly 1 single week entirely to flawlessly fix absolutely all of this." She completely stopped entirely in the heavy door entirely of the busy kitchen. "You actively had exactly 15 agonizing years, Ricardo. The innocent children and I absolutely cannot highly patiently wait absolutely any longer." When they safely went completely upstairs, entirely to rapidly pack, Ricardo remained completely, utterly alone. He intensely looked completely around entirely at the highly quiet restaurant, completely filled entirely with highly beautiful memories, entirely of the highly magical last few weeks. The highly creative drawings, entirely of Alejandro, beautifully taped completely to the warm wall. The highly quiet corner exactly where Danny had brilliantly programmed. The highly specific table exactly where Clara had beautifully taught him exactly how to flawlessly distinguish highly complex spices. Absolutely everything was violently vanishing completely away, entirely again. But this highly specific time, he was absolutely not actively going to cowardly stand perfectly by, entirely with his massive arms completely crossed. He aggressively grabbed his expensive phone and frantically began to actively make highly urgent calls directly to his elite lawyers, directly to highly elite private detectives, directly to highly influential contacts entirely in the massive media. If Sophia and Benjamin desperately wanted a massive, highly explosive war, they were actively going to absolutely get exactly that. But exactly when he confidently went completely upstairs, entirely to beautifully say a highly emotional goodbye, he horrifyingly discovered that they had absolutely already completely left. Absolutely only a highly brief note miraculously remained completely on the small kitchen table. Ricardo, please highly carefully take absolute care entirely of the quiet restaurant completely until we fiercely decide exactly what to successfully do completely with it. The innocent children desperately need massive time entirely to profoundly understand absolutely all of this. Please do absolutely not actively look completely for us. Isabella, for the absolute second time completely in his entire life. He had violently lost the beautiful woman he fiercely loved and his innocent children. But this highly specific time, absolutely not entirely due completely to highly toxic family pressure, but entirely because of his absolute own, highly arrogant choices. The massive absolute difference was that exactly now, he profoundly knew exactly why it was completely 100% worth violently fighting entirely for. Ricardo's entire life is falling apart. Do you think he can save his company and win back his family? Let us know. The Barcelona reunion. Exactly 6 agonizing months significantly later, Isabella was actively drying her soft hands completely on her clean apron, exactly as she meticulously checked the highly busy evening reservations. Her highly beautiful brand new restaurant, entirely in Barcelona, absolutely also explicitly named Sabores Sinceros, had absolutely been significantly more highly successful than she had absolutely ever actively expected. The highly delicious homemade food and the highly warm, familiar atmosphere had incredibly rapidly, beautifully won completely over the highly demanding locals. "Mom, I completely finished my heavy homework," Clara happily announced, meticulously putting her heavy books securely into her backpack. "Can I happily help you completely with the highly special dinner, completely for exactly tonight?" "Absolutely, of course, my beautiful love." And Danny is actively in his quiet room brilliantly programming completely again. Isabella heavily sighed. Danny had absolutely possessed significantly more highly complex problems, actively adapting completely to the massive change. Although he was absolutely no longer exactly as violently angry, exactly as completely in the absolute first agonizing months, he absolutely still remained incredibly highly reserved exactly whenever they softly talked entirely about his biological father. Clara had beautifully processed the highly explosive revelations significantly better. But highly occasionally, Isabella unexpectedly caught her intensely looking completely out the large window, completely with a highly melancholic, sad expression. Alejandro, entirely on the absolute contrary, had beautifully, flawlessly flourished entirely in Barcelona. He actively possessed highly loyal, brand new friends entirely in the local school, and had actively begun to happily play soccer entirely in a highly competitive local team. "Mommy." Alejandro softly approached her exactly as she meticulously prepared fresh vegetables. "Do you genuinely think Ricardo is actively looking completely for us?" It was the highly massive, terrifying question that absolutely everyone aggressively avoided actively asking, but that highly, constantly, violently floated completely in the heavy air. "I honestly do not completely know, my beautiful love." "Why exactly do you highly curiously ask?" "Because completely last night, I beautifully dreamed entirely about him. He was actively teaching me exactly how to seamlessly use his massive computer completely again." Isabella smoothly knelt completely down entirely to Alejandro's tiny height. "Do you deeply miss him?" "Yes, he was incredibly fun. And I fiercely liked exactly how you visually looked, exactly when he was actively here." "Exactly how did I visually look?" "Highly happy. Exactly when you successfully make your absolute favorite delicious dish. Or exactly when you vividly see absolutely all of us loudly laughing completely together." Before Isabella could successfully respond, Danny confidently appeared completely in the busy kitchen, completely with his expensive laptop. "Mom, can you please actively look completely at absolutely something?" He had miraculously become significantly more highly communicative entirely in the highly magical last few weeks. Highly, especially, exactly when it explicitly came completely to his highly advanced technological projects. "What exactly is it?" "I was aggressively investigating Dad, his massive company, exactly what violently happened completely after we violently left." Isabella physically felt a highly tight knot completely in her heavy stomach. "Danny, no!" I simply desperately wanted to profoundly understand, intensely look directly at exactly this. Danny highly proudly showed her highly numerous, highly explosive online newspaper articles. The absolute first, highly dramatic pages aggressively showed the massive scandal. Multi-millionaire highly publicly cancels massive multi-million euro wedding. Elite businessman violently sues former elite partners entirely for massive fraud. The catastrophic fall entirely of a massive technological empire. But there were absolutely significantly more highly recent, beautiful articles that Isabella had absolutely not vividly seen. Ricardo had completely, legally sold his massive primary company and had miraculously, beautifully utilized the massive money entirely to successfully create a highly massive educational foundation. He had flawlessly opened highly advanced technological centers entirely in highly struggling, low-income communities completely across entire Spain. "Do you vividly see exactly this specific one?" Danny gently pointed directly at a highly recent, beautiful article. He flawlessly opened a highly advanced programming center, completely right perfectly here, entirely in Barcelona, exactly 3 short months completely ago. It is literally exactly 20 short minutes completely away, entirely, from exactly here. Isabella's massive heart violently accelerated. He is actively here, completely in Barcelona, completely according entirely to exactly this. Yes, and intensely look directly at exactly this other one. Danny rapidly changed the glowing page. He miraculously won the massive lawsuit completely against Sofia and his highly toxic partner. He violently sued them completely for massive fraud and highly illegal forgery. They are officially, securely in federal prison. Clara absolutely also smoothly approached, highly curious entirely about the highly intense conversation. What exactly is actively happening? Danny rapidly, highly explicitly explained his highly massive discoveries completely to her. Clara meticulously reviewed the highly detailed articles completely, with intense attention. It explicitly says he actively donates miraculously, almost absolutely all his massive money entirely to highly supportive educational programs. Why exactly would he actively do exactly that? Perhaps entirely because he genuinely, truly miraculously changed, Isabella murmured incredibly softly, significantly more entirely to herself than completely to her beautiful children. At that exact, highly perfect moment, Alejandro, who had been intensely looking directly at the beautiful photos entirely on the glowing laptop, enthusiastically pointed directly at the bright screen, completely with massive emotion. "Look, that is officially the exact same man who highly occasionally confidently comes directly to the local park." Isabella confidently approached incredibly quickly. Entirely and exactly one. Entirely of the highly beautiful photos. Entirely of the massive article. Ricardo proudly appeared, beautifully inaugurating the highly advanced technological center. He visually looked incredibly different, significantly thinner, significantly less highly formal, completely with a highly genuine, massive smile, exactly as he enthusiastically taught a highly curious group entirely of young children. What exact man, Alejandro? When I happily go to actively play soccer entirely on busy Saturdays, there is highly occasionally a highly quiet man who intensely watches the highly intense practices completely from incredibly far. Completely away. I genuinely thought he was the loving dad entirely of some other young boy entirely on the active team. But it is absolutely him. It is officially Ricardo. Isabella physically felt exactly as if the massive world was violently moving completely beneath her weak feet. Ricardo had actively been entirely in Barcelona, entirely for agonizing months. Incredibly close completely to them, but completely without actively approaching. Are you absolutely 100% sure it is officially him? Yes! He absolutely even highly gently waved completely at me, exactly once. Exactly when my colorful ball accidentally rolled incredibly close, completely to exactly where he was peacefully sitting. Danny incredibly slowly closed the expensive laptop. Why exactly hasn't he actively come directly to frantically look completely for us exactly if he is actively right here? Isabella possessed absolutely zero pathetic answer entirely for exactly that. Absolute respect entirely for her highly strict decision entirely to actively stay completely away. Blinding fear entirely of highly toxic rejection. Or had he genuinely, truly successfully found a highly beautiful brand new life completely without them? "Mom," Clara stated incredibly softly, "do you genuinely think we could— I honestly don't completely know— actively go vividly see him absolutely just to safely talk? I honestly do not completely know entirely if that is a highly good, massive idea. Please," Danny aggressively insisted. "I simply desperately want to actively ask him a highly few, massive things. Exactly why he violently left absolutely all that highly toxic world entirely of massive money. And exactly why he is actively right perfectly here, but absolutely hasn't actively come completely to frantically look completely for us." Isabella intensely looked directly at the highly hopeful, beautiful faces entirely of her beautiful children. For exactly 6 agonizing months, she had desperately attempted to fiercely protect them completely from massive pain. But perhaps she had absolutely also toxically denied them the highly beautiful possibility entirely to miraculously heal. "Okay," she finally stated, "but we absolutely go completely all perfectly together. And exactly if he absolutely does not desperately want to vividly see us, we respectfully completely respect that, and we confidently leave, okay?" The exactly 3 young children nodded fiercely, highly emotional. "When exactly?" Alejandro excitedly asked. Isabella intensely looked directly at the heavy clock. It was exactly 4 p.m. entirely on a busy Saturday. "Right exactly now. Let's aggressively go right now completely before I violently regret it." As they rapidly prepared completely to confidently leave, Isabella agonizingly wondered entirely if she was actively making the absolute right, massive decision. They had successfully built a highly stable, beautiful life entirely in Barcelona, completely without highly toxic complications, completely without massive pain. But exactly upon vividly seeing the highly pure hope entirely in the beautiful eyes entirely of her innocent children, she profoundly realized that perhaps it was officially time, entirely, to bravely risk absolutely everything completely again. Perhaps it was officially time entirely to horrifyingly find completely out exactly if Ricardo had truly, genuinely, miraculously changed, or exactly if he was simply toxically pretending to actively be a completely, utterly different person. In exactly 20 short minutes, they would officially possess the absolute, undeniable answers. The reunion of truth, the highly modest Community Technological Center, Códigos de Esperanza, was securely located entirely in a highly humble, beautiful area entirely of Barcelona. Incredibly, vastly different, completely from the highly elegant, massive corporate buildings that Isabella vividly remembered completely from Ricardo's highly toxic previous life. It was a highly modest, beautiful building, flawlessly painted, completely with highly bright, vibrant colors, completely with a highly beautiful handmade sign that proudly read, "Right exactly here, absolutely everyone can successfully learn." Isabella smoothly parked the cheap car, and the exactly 4 entirely of them peacefully sat, entirely for exactly 1 highly brief moment, intensely observing the beautiful place completely through the large windows. "Are you absolutely 100% sure you desperately want to actively do this, Mom?" Clara softly asked, highly clearly noticing the massive nervousness entirely of her beautiful mother. "I am absolutely not completely sure entirely of absolutely anything," Isabella honestly admitted. "But you absolutely possess the absolute, undeniable right to explicitly know exactly who your biological father truly, genuinely is as exactly now." Through the highly clear glass entirely of the bright center, they could vividly, clearly see Ricardo happily sitting entirely on the hard floor, heavily surrounded entirely by highly curious children, entirely from exactly 8 to 12 young years old. He flawlessly wore highly comfortable jeans and a highly simple, cheap t-shirt. Absolutely nothing completely to actively do entirely with the highly elegant, expensive suits he arrogantly used to absolutely always wear. He was happily helping a highly curious young boy carefully connect highly complex cables completely to a highly advanced computer, flawlessly made, completely with highly recycled parts. And exactly when you carefully connect exactly this highly complex cable perfectly here, The massive current can flawlessly flow and beautifully light completely up the tiny LED. Do you vividly see? It is exactly like generously giving the massive electricity a highly clear path entirely to flawlessly go directly exactly where it desperately needs to actively go. The young boy smiled radiantly, highly excited, exactly when the highly small, beautiful light miraculously turned completely on. It flawlessly worked. I am officially an absolute scientist. You are absolutely, infinitely, significantly more than entirely just exactly that. Ricardo softly told him completely, with a highly genuine, massive smile. You are officially an absolute brilliant inventor. It was exactly then that he slowly looked completely up and vividly saw them. Time completely, utterly stopped entirely. The massive expression entirely of blinding surprise completely on his handsome face, incredibly slowly transformed completely into absolutely something that Isabella literally could not actively decipher. Pure joy, blinding fear, massive hope. Absolutely all violently mixed completely together. Danny, Clara, Alejandro. Isabella confidently stood completely up, incredibly slowly. The young children remained completely frozen, exactly as if they absolutely didn't completely know exactly what to actively do. Completely with this highly explosive, massive moment they had actively anticipated entirely for agonizing weeks. It was Alejandro who bravely broke the heavy silence completely by enthusiastically running directly toward him. I absolutely knew it was officially you entirely in the massive park. Ricardo smoothly knelt completely down entirely to safely receive the highly fierce hug entirely of Alejandro, completely with hot tears beautifully shining entirely in his piercing eyes. Hello, my beautiful champion. Exactly how is the absolute, highly most talented soccer player entirely and absolutely all of Barcelona actively doing? I successfully scored exactly 3 massive goals completely last week. Why exactly didn't you actively come directly to vividly see me happily play, exactly if you were absolutely already, completely there? The highly direct, massive question entirely of Alejandro aggressively made absolutely everyone violently tense completely up. Ricardo intensely looked directly at Isabella, completely over the absolute top, entirely of the innocent boy's dark head. Why? Because I desperately wanted to actively be absolutely 100% sure that it was the absolute right, massive thing to actively do. Your beautiful mom explicitly said that you absolutely all desperately needed massive time. Danny cautiously approached incredibly slowly. Is it absolutely true exactly what we vividly read? That you legally sold your massive company? And that Sophia is officially securely in federal prison? It is absolutely true. You highly aggressively investigated me. Danny is incredibly, highly brilliant entirely at actively investigating. Clara absolutely also smoothly approached. He successfully found absolutely all the highly detailed articles entirely about exactly what violently happened, completely after we violently left. Ricardo aggressively straightened completely up, actively keeping Alejandro incredibly close. And exactly what do you absolutely all fiercely think entirely about exactly what you vividly read? That perhaps we were completely, catastrophically wrong, entirely to highly rapidly judge you so incredibly fast, Danny honestly admitted. But absolutely also that we absolutely do not completely understand exactly why you are actively right perfectly here, and absolutely had not actively come completely to frantically look completely for us. Isabella finally, bravely spoke. Can we actively talk completely alone? Ricardo politely asked exactly one entirely of his highly dedicated volunteers to actively take absolute charge entirely of the busy workshop, and gently guided them directly to a highly small, quiet office entirely at the absolute back entirely of the bright center. It was incredibly simple, but highly functional, completely with highly colorful children's drawings beautifully taped completely to the blank walls, and a highly old, cheap coffee maker entirely in exactly one quiet corner. "How incredibly long have you actively been completely here?" Isabella softly asked. "Exactly 4 agonizing months. I successfully opened the bright center exactly 3 short months, completely ago. And exactly why absolutely not? Because I fiercely respect your absolute decision," he smoothly interrupted her. "You explicitly said that you absolutely all desperately needed massive time and absolute space. I absolutely did not desperately want to aggressively pressure you. Highly, especially, completely, after absolutely all the highly catastrophic, massive damage that I absolutely had already violently caused." Clara spoke incredibly timidly. "But you vividly saw us entirely in the massive park." Ricardo smiled highly sadly. "I absolutely only desperately wanted to flawlessly ensure that you were absolutely perfectly fine. To vividly see that Alejandro was incredibly happy, that you were absolutely all successfully adapting. I absolutely never, ever actively planned to aggressively approach." "Then exactly why did you actively come directly to Barcelona?" Danny asked completely, with the highly brutal, pure frankness he had absolutely inherited completely from his biological father. "Because completely after you violently left, I profoundly realized that my entire, massive life had absolutely been a highly toxic, massive lie. The massive money, the toxic power, the elite connections. Absolutely none entirely of it truly mattered completely to me. Truly, the absolute only massive thing I desperately wanted was to actively be the true, genuine man that you absolutely all fiercely deserved exactly as a true father." He sat heavily, completely on the absolute edge, entirely of the cheap desk, intensely looking directly at his beautiful children. "So, I legally sold absolutely everything. I successfully paid absolutely all the massive lawsuits, and I fiercely decided to beautifully start completely over, to actively do absolutely something that truly, genuinely, was 100% worth absolutely all the massive effort. And is exactly this absolutely worth it?" Isabella softly asked, gracefully gesturing completely around her. "Significantly more than I absolutely ever magically imagined. These highly innocent children have flawlessly taught me significantly more, entirely about true, genuine life, entirely in exactly 4 short months, than I absolutely learned entirely in exactly 35 agonizing years." Alejandro had absolutely been incredibly silent. But suddenly, he bravely spoke. "Are you actively going to violently leave completely again?" The highly massive question violently dropped exactly like a highly lethal bomb, completely in the tiny office. Ricardo smoothly knelt completely down, perfectly, entirely in front, entirely, of Alejandro. "No, absolutely not exactly if you absolutely do not desperately want me to actively leave. I absolutely do not fiercely want," Alejandro stated immediately. Danny and Clara highly nervously exchanged massive glances. "We desperately need massive time to deeply think entirely about it," Danny finally stated. "To profoundly understand absolutely all entirely of this. Absolutely, of course. Isabella had absolutely been intensely observing the entire, highly emotional interaction, completely in absolute silence. This Ricardo was completely, undeniably different. Absolutely, not entirely just completely in his highly cheap clothes, or the highly modest place exactly where he actively worked, but entirely in absolutely something significantly, profoundly deeper. The exact, beautiful way he softly spoke, exactly how he intensely looked directly at the young children. His absolute, unbreakable patience. "What exactly do you actively propose?" she softly asked him. "That you generously give me exactly one highly fragile opportunity entirely to fiercely prove completely to you that I can successfully be the true father I absolutely should have been from the absolute very beginning. Completely without highly toxic pressures. Completely without massive, highly fake promises. Absolutely just actively being completely, utterly present." Clara slowly approached and fiercely hugged him highly suddenly, violently taking absolutely everyone completely by massive surprise. "I deeply missed you," she whispered incredibly softly, completely against his broad shoulder. Danny actively took a highly tiny bit, significantly longer. But finally, he absolutely also slowly approached. "I absolutely also deeply missed you, but exactly if you violently hurt us completely again." "I absolutely will not," Ricardo fiercely promised. "This highly specific time, you will absolutely have to aggressively kick me completely out entirely for me to ever actively leave." Ricardo gave up his entire fortune to be near his kids. Would you forgive him after that? Tell us below. A rebuilt family. A shared future. During the highly transformative, beautiful following weeks, incredibly slowly, they aggressively began to beautifully rebuild their highly fragile, beautiful family relationship. Ricardo happily visited the quiet restaurant completely after his massive work. He enthusiastically helped completely with the highly complex homework entirely of the young children. And incredibly slowly, he flawlessly integrated completely into their highly busy daily routine. Busy Saturdays beautifully became his highly special, massive day. He enthusiastically took Danny to actively explore highly complex, brand new programming projects. He happily cooked completely with Clara, fearlessly experimenting completely with highly complex, international recipes. And he enthusiastically played soccer completely with Alejandro, entirely in the local park. Isabella intensely watched exactly how her beautiful children miraculously flourished completely, with the highly constant, beautiful presence entirely of their true father. Danny had actively begun to happily help completely in the highly advanced technological center, flawlessly teaching the significantly younger children. Clara had actively begun to meticulously plan highly special, delicious menus entirely to successfully raise massive funds entirely for the Bright Center. And Alejandro had officially named Ricardo his highly exclusive personal soccer coach. One beautiful Sunday afternoon, completely after peacefully closing the quiet restaurant, the exactly 5 entirely of them were peacefully sitting entirely at the highly small, beautiful family table. Happily sharing a highly delicious dinner they had beautifully prepared completely together. "Do you absolutely all profoundly know exactly what?" Ricardo softly stated, intensely looking completely around the small table. "This is officially the absolute first time completely in my entire life that I profoundly, genuinely feel completely, utterly rich. But you absolutely do not legally possess massive money completely anymore?" Alejandro asked, highly confused. I successfully possess absolutely something significantly, infinitely significantly better, he warmly replied, gently taking Isabella's soft hand entirely for the absolute first time in agonizing months. I officially possess a highly true, beautiful family. Isabella physically felt hot tears entirely in her beautiful eyes. But they were absolutely hot tears, entirely of pure, unadulterated happiness. Does exactly this explicitly mean that you are actively going to happily be boyfriend and girlfriend completely again? Clara playfully asked, completely with a highly mischievous, beautiful smile. Ricardo intensely looked directly at Isabella completely, with a highly silent, massive question, beautifully shining entirely in his piercing eyes. It explicitly means that we are actively going to see exactly what beautifully happens, she warmly replied. Exactly step completely by cautious step. Exactly one beautiful day, completely at a highly precious time. Exactly 6 beautiful months significantly later. Entirely on a highly rainy, beautiful December afternoon. Ricardo confidently appeared completely in the quiet restaurant, completely with absolutely something highly secret, perfectly hidden, completely behind his broad back. What exactly do you actively have right perfectly there? Isabella cautiously asked, completely with a highly tiny bit entirely of pure distrust. Absolutely something that I desperately wanted to proudly show, absolutely all entirely of you. He aggressively pulled completely out highly official documents and gently placed them completely on the small table, exactly where the exactly 4 entirely of them were peacefully sitting. It is officially the absolute legal deed entirely to a highly massive plot, entirely of beautiful land, perfectly right here, entirely on the absolute outskirts, entirely of beautiful Barcelona. It is completely, absolutely perfect, entirely, for aggressively building a massive, beautiful house, exactly if you absolutely all fiercely want. Isabella gently took the heavy papers completely with violently trembling hands. Ricardo, it absolutely isn't entirely just completely for US. It absolutely also explicitly possesses highly massive space entirely to successfully expand the bright technological center, and perhaps, beautifully, at a highly advanced elite culinary school. Danny could highly successfully possess his absolute own highly advanced computer lab. Clara, her absolute own highly professional kitchen. And Alejandro, well, Alejandro could highly successfully possess the absolute biggest, most massive backyard, entirely and absolutely all entirely, of Barcelona completely to happily play soccer. The young children violently became incredibly, highly excited completely immediately. But Isabella desperately needed to be absolutely 100% sure. Is exactly this officially a highly massive proposal? This is officially a highly absolute promise, Ricardo stated, gently taking absolutely both entirely of her soft hands. A highly absolute promise that I desperately want to aggressively build absolutely something incredibly real, completely with you. Absolutely not entirely out of toxic obligation, absolutely not entirely out of massive guilt, but entirely because, exactly when I am actively completely with you, I am the absolute best, most beautiful version entirely of myself. Isabella intensely looked directly at the highly hopeful, beautiful faces entirely of her beautiful children. And then, directly at the highly sincere, piercing eyes, entirely of the exact, beautiful man she had miraculously learned to fiercely love exactly twice. Okay, she whispered incredibly softly. Let's aggressively build absolutely something beautiful completely together. The highly passionate, beautiful kiss that violently followed was loudly, beautifully interrupted completely by the highly joyful, loud shouts entirely of the young children, and the highly enthusiastic, loud applause entirely of the highly loyal restaurant customers who had absolutely been highly discreetly, actively watching. Exactly 3 beautiful months significantly later, entirely in a highly small but utterly flawless, perfect ceremony, completely in the beautiful backyard, entirely of the cozy restaurant. Isabella Torres happily married Ricardo Sterling. Danny confidently walked completely with his beautiful mother directly toward the highly improvised, beautiful altar. Clara was the highly stunning maid of honor, flawlessly wearing a highly beautiful dress she had meticulously chosen entirely herself. And Alejandro proudly carried the highly simple rings, completely with the highly absolute seriousness, entirely of someone who profoundly understands the highly massive importance entirely of the magical moment. The highly beautiful celebration was exactly, flawlessly exactly, what Isabella had absolutely always beautifully dreamed entirely of. Highly simple, incredibly authentic, heavily surrounded entirely by the highly genuine people who truly, fiercely loved them. The young children, completely from the highly advanced technological center, had beautifully made the highly colorful decorations. The highly loyal neighbors, entirely of the quiet restaurant, had happily brought highly delicious dishes, completely to happily share. And the beautiful music was flawlessly provided completely by a highly talented local band, who happily played completely, for absolute free, entirely. Because true, pure love fiercely deserves to be beautifully celebrated. When the exact magical moment violently arrived entirely for the highly emotional vows, Ricardo absolutely did not, absolutely only actively speak completely to Isabella. Isabella, I fiercely promise to deeply love you and highly respect you every single beautiful day entirely of my entire life. I fiercely promise to absolutely be the highly loyal partner you fiercely deserve, and the true father that our beautiful children desperately need. Danny, Clara, Alejandro, I fiercely promise that you will absolutely never, ever violently doubt my absolute love or my highly massive commitment completely to this beautiful family ever again. Isabella, completely with hot tears, entirely of pure happiness, violently streaming completely down her pale cheeks, softly replied, Ricardo, I fiercely promise to generously give you the highly massive opportunity to actively be the true, beautiful man you desperately want to actively be. I fiercely promise to aggressively build the highly warm home we absolutely always beautifully dreamed entirely of completely with you. And I fiercely promise that this highly specific time, exactly when the highly massive, terrifying storms violently arrive, we will absolutely, fiercely face them completely. Together. The absolute rest entirely of the highly magical night, beautifully blurred, completely into a highly chaotic, beautiful mixture entirely of pure laughter, highly energetic dancing, and incredibly fierce, warm hugs. When absolutely everyone finally, happily left, and the highly beautiful family was completely left entirely alone, happily cleaning completely up, Ricardo completely stopped to intensely observe the highly beautiful scene. Isabella happily storing the highly clean dinner plates, Danny enthusiastically helping to rapidly fold the cheap chairs, Clara meticulously organizing the highly beautiful gifts, and Alejandro, deeply asleep entirely in a highly comfortable chair, completely with a massive, highly peaceful smile completely on his tiny face. It was completely, utterly perfect, entirely, in its highly pure imperfection. Incredibly real, entirely in its beautiful simplicity. He had finally, miraculously successfully found the highly warm home he had absolutely always been desperately searching entirely for. And this highly specific time, he profoundly knew exactly how to fiercely, aggressively protect it. Exactly one highly delicious, beautifully cooked dish. Exactly one highly complex programming lesson. And exactly one highly fierce, beautiful family hug, completely at a highly precious, massive time.